I love the Temple Mount from the reading of the scriptures. Jesus went to the Temple Mount. The Apostle Paul was on the Temple Mount. And the more I worked on the site, I was able to create a reconstruction of the Temple Mount. The ultimate desire is to build the third temple.
It's so awesome to have Dr. Leen Ritmeyer on here with InGrace. And I saw you last in Shiloh in 2019, the first time I met you. And I am so thankful to be able to talk to you today, especially about a very important place in the Bible, and that's the Temple Mount. You are the expert on the archaeology and the architecture of that place and many other places in Israel. But Dr. Ritmeyer, what led you to be so interested in the Temple Mount?
I suppose it was at a very prosaic beginning. I was looking for a job. In the Netherlands, I was trained as a teacher of physical education, but I had half a year free, so I went traveling around and ended up in Israel, worked on the kibbutz and visited the Temple Mount, and eventually I was offered the job of a surveyor, and an Irish architect trained me in. He left 4 months later, and I enjoyed the work, and the professor told me to sit in his chair, in the architect's chair. So I've been an archaeological architect ever since. And of course, I love the Temple Mount from the reading of the scriptures. You know, it features prominently in the Bible. Even Abram, in Genesis 15, after he met Melchizedek, he was taken outside. He would have camped close to the Gihon Spring, and they had to bring this huge sacrifice. But if you take him outside of the Ophel area, then it must be on Mount Moriah. And you got the story of Melchizedek there. You got David building an altar in the threshing floor after that big plague that God brought, because he had counted the people without paying the ransom money. And then we read about Solomon building the temple, Zerubbabel rebuilding it after the Babylonian destruction. It's a site full of history. Jesus went to the Temple Mount. The Apostle Paul was on the Temple Mount. And therefore it is full of scriptural interest. And the more I worked on the site, making plans and elevations of all the remains and of the fallen debris as well, I was able to create a reconstruction of the Temple Mount, first on paper, later also in models, and then in 3D. And it just got in my blood, as it were. And you think about the future as well, because we're living in very important times, that the Jews have come back from the Holocaust, as it says in Ezekiel 38. The people brought back from the sword, Hitler's sword, and they established a state there in 48, and they recaptured Jerusalem in 67. And now there's a very strong movement, especially with the modern government, to take control of the Temple Mount. And the ultimate desire is to build a temple, the third temple. And of course, in Ezekiel chapters 40 to 48, we've got a fabulous description of the Messianic temple. And I personally believe that Jesus will come back. He's the only man, or the only Son of God, that can save the world from itself, from all the plagues and of pestilence and the sword and famine. And a new temple will be built. But the interesting thing is, when you talk to religious Jews about it, they know very well that they can't build the temple at the moment, because the beautiful building, Dome of the Rock, stands there. They know very well you blow that up and you got the World War III on your hands, and they know they can't do it. Therefore, some people have suggested a temple stood either to the north or the south of the Dome of the Rock, as if the Muslims would allow a temple to be built right next to the Dome of the Rock. But they believe, and therefore it's so important that they got the red heifer now, because they can't do anything until they are purified by the ashes of the red heifer. Now, Jesus, of course, makes a comparison in Hebrews chapter 11. They purify the flesh, but we need to purify our conscience. But they believe, the Jews, the religious Jews, I had lots of contact with them, especially people in the Temple Institute that want to rebuild the temple. They make hundreds of garments for priests, and they got incense ready in all the vessels. They are ready to start a temple service, but they know they can't. They got to wait till the Messiah comes. They believe that. They may not believe that Jesus is the Messiah, but it's certainly Jesus will be the one that comes back. And they believe that if they can only build an altar, and start sacrificing on the Temple Mount, then Messiah will come and help them build the temple. And it's a very strong feeling among many religious Jewish people. And they asked me for lectures, where was the altar exactly? And I showed them the layout of the temple, the whole development from beginning to today. And they can see that I know that my suggestion where Solomon's temple stood and where the altar stood in Herod's temple, therefore in Solomon's temple on the threshing floor of David, is correct. And they just slowly getting themselves ready to do that.
Do you believe that the threshing floor would have been a little bit, not at the very, very top of the rock, just off down a little bit and in a depression?
Yes, not necessarily a depression, but I've studied the geography of the rock, the top of Mount Moriah, and it stands about 10 feet around its surroundings. Now, a threshing floor, you don't build on the very top of the mountain because the wind will carry away chaff and grain as well. You don't want that. And often, threshing floors are found just below the top. Now, the prevailing wind in Israel is from the west. So I would look to the east of the Dome of the Rock, where there's a very vast empty platform for the place of the altar. And it's an open space, there's no building there, and I wouldn't be surprised if eventually they will come to an agreement with the Muslim authorities. Perhaps you need a holy covenant with the Muslim Jews and Christians to let the Jews start their celebrations by sacrificing animals.
Yeah.
There'd be an outcry by people that love animals and they think it's a horrendous thing to do. But prophecy is prophecy, and wait and see.
Yeah, fascinating.
I worked for the United Bible Society for about 3 years, and they asked me to make maps of every journey in the Bible. I came to 300 maps, and it's fascinating because you can connect events through geography, which otherwise you couldn't.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. I love that kind of stuff. And, I don't know if you knew this, but Scott Stripling and I went to try to find the secret pass of Michmash, where Jonathan snuck up.
Yeah, it's not so secret, but you can see it from
right.
the main road.
We ended up climbing this hill, and we think it's probably, with the modern road there, it's harder to tell maybe from what it would have been, but it certainly felt right when we got to the top of that, and it was kind of cool.
Interestingly, General Allenby, when he conquered the land, after Jerusalem went to Michmash, he followed the tactics
we told
of
that story
Jonathan.
Too. I love that because
fantastic.
Because of Allenby, then eventually Israel got the land because it was in the British control and the British mandate and all of that stuff. It was just like God. I love when you have something modern and something ancient coming together like that. Really amazing.
Yeah. Fabulous.
So I just mainly want to get your views on where the temple would have been.
Well, the Temple Mount, as we know it, has been traditionally the Temple Mount for not decades, but for centuries. The Jews have been praying there for as long as they can remember. And if you look at the architecture, it is so impressive. And the site is so massive, you can put 25 football fields on it. There's nothing like it. You can put the largest pyramid of Egypt, the one in Giza, twice on the Temple Mount, and they still have space left to walk around it. And the architecture is very similar to the Tomb of the Patriarchs. It's typical Herodian architecture. The walls are 15 feet thick and was built to last. And the foundation walls of the platform are still there. And besides that, we have Hebrew inscriptions. In the Byzantine period, when there was a kind of a revival hoping to rebuild the temple, somebody wrote in Hebrew, Isaiah 66 and verse 14 in the wall, just below Robertson's Arch. When you will see this, your heart will rejoice and your bones will flourish like the grass. And many other Hebrew inscriptions found. We found Hebrew coins, many of them around the Temple Mount. And it must be there because it says in 2 Chronicles 3 and verse 1 that Solomon built a temple on Mount Moriah in the place where David built an altar in the threshing floor of Araunah. You need to know something about ancient agriculture, because threshing floors are always built on the top of the mountain, because you need a wind to blow the chaff away when you're winnowing the produce after you've threshed it. And then the chaff falls further away in one heap and the grain falls down closer by. You remember the story of Gideon? Because the Midianites were invading the land and trying to steal their corn, he had to thresh corn in the wine press. Wine presses are always found in the valley because it's easy. You can press wine wherever you want to, so it's easy to bring it down from the mountainside to the valley. So there's a very important indicator as well. In 1 Kings 8 and verse 1, again, it says Solomon brought up the Ark of the Covenant out of the city of David and brought it to Mount Moriah. So if you know the geography of Jerusalem, the eastern hill where the original city was built, on the lower slopes near the Gihon Spring, you've got the city of David. Melchizedek had a city there. Then you get higher up the Ophel area. That's where Professor Benjamin Mazar conducted his excavations, and I was his architect for many, many years. And then on top you got Mount Moriah, which you can't see anymore, surrounded by the walls of the Temple Mount. But inside the Dome of the Rock you can still see the large stone, which is the top of Mount Moriah. So all those things point, there's a fact that the Temple Mount as we know it, Haram Esharif, as the Muslims call it, is the original Temple Mount. And there's some voices, especially in the United States, not believed in Israel or in many other places, that the Temple Mount stood in the city of David. But it's quite impossible because there have been many excavations on the eastern slope on both sides of the Gihon Spring, and they found 50 feet layers of debris, which dates back from the Hellenistic period. All buildings, especially the larger buildings in Jerusalem, are built on the rock itself. So even if the temple has completely disappeared, you would see a hole in the debris, but there isn't. It's quite impossible that the temple was built anywhere else but where everybody knows where it is. So those are some of the facts. And for example, I recently put up a blog post on the Beautiful Gate. And well, the beautiful domes that have been preserved make it quite clear that that was the Beautiful Gate. The massive staircase, 200 feet wide staircase where the pilgrims went up from the Siloam Pool to the Temple Mount. There's a large building with ritual baths right next to it. So where the Jewish pilgrims could purify themselves. The whole site is too Jewish not to be the Temple Mount. When I started to work in the 70s with Benjamin Mazar on the Temple Mount excavations, I read many books. One was Jerusalem in the Old Testament by Jan Simons, a Dutchman, just like I'm a Dutchman. And read the question that the Temple Mount could be anywhere else than where we know it is has never come up. But today, in the age of fake news, anything is believed nowadays. As long as you make a buck out of it, then people are all right with it.
There's incredible public interest in the Temple Mount. It is the very center of millions of people's thoughts and prayers. So what is it? Why is there so much interest around the world today for that geographic location, that piece of real estate that you had the opportunity of working on and measuring?
Yes, well, I spent years measuring not only on top of the Temple Mount, but around it and even underneath it. I surveyed the double gate tunnel and the triple gate and Solomon's stables. I spent a whole week inside the Golden Gate to measure it and make drawings, and so I know it inside out. The interest must be that Moses, or God told Moses, that he will choose a place to place his name there. And that, if you read in Psalm 78, for example, first he talks about that mountain when he brought him out of Egypt, that's Mount Sinai, which his right hand had purchased. And then later in the Psalm, in verse 60, you read about he forsook Shiloh, because there's a place where the tabernacle stood for a long time. But then he says, he chose the tribe of Judah and Mount Zion, which he loved. So you feel when you go to that place that there is something special. It's the not only the cobalt blue sky, that some people develop the Jerusalem syndrome. There the Messiah start riding on donkeys, or they dress themselves in white garments, and it has a very special effect on people.
Did that ever happen to you?
No. I kept my sanity. Yeah, it's very important if you work on such an important archaeological site to keep your feet on the ground. Mm-hmm. When we worked in the Jewish Quarter with Professor Nachman Avigat, I was able to identify Middlegate, which is mentioned in Jeremiah chapter 3. And you can get very excited about it, but when you dig, your hand gets black with the soot of the destruction of the Babylonians, and it makes you sober and think, why was this destroyed? How must our attitude to God be in order to prevent calamities like that? Yeah. And it's important, therefore, especially for the Jews and for the Muslims, because after all, and the Christian, we all have Abraham in common. Mm-hmm. We all believe in Ibrahim or Abraham or Avraham, whatever they call him. He was the ancestor of all three faiths, and that binds them all together. Mm-hmm. The Jews got their perspective because they're God's chosen people. He chose Solomon to build a temple there. And for the Christians, it's important because, Jesus was on the Temple Mount, and many times when he was 12 years old, he went to the Temple Mount. We read in Luke chapter 2. His father and mother went back to Nazareth, not realizing that they lost their son. But where was he? He was back in the temple, in his father's house, and asking them questions and giving the answer. They was surprised at his knowledge. And you think, what kind of questions would he have asked? But it was Passover time. He must have seen the Passover lamb being ordained. And I think that was the first time that as a young boy, he realized that he was going to be that Passover lamb. And he prepared all his life for that. And those are such important events in the life of Jesus. And the New Testament as well, as I said before, the Apostle Paul, he was taken on the Temple Mount and taken to the Antonia Fortress, which stood at the northwest corner. Judas, he betrayed Jesus for 30 shekels of silver. He threw it back in the temple. Where? In the Holy of Holies? No, in the court of the women, where all the money boxes stood. And so there's a very important connection. And then when we come to the Muslim period after the Roman destruction, and about the legend goes that in one night, Muhammad came from Mecca and he went to Jerusalem, and in the same night he went to heaven, horse and all, and then came back, and that became the place of the night journey and became a shrine. But when it was built, the Muslims, Omar, asked the Jewish people where was the location of Solomon's temple, and they showed him the rock outcrop, and that's why they built the Dome of the Rock there. Even in the Guide to the Temple Mount to Haram al-Sharif of 1925, it is written, it's a well-known fact that the Dome of the Rock is built on the place where Solomon had built his temple. So we get all three faiths are very strongly connected, focused on that one particular point. I always compare it with Mount Tabor in the north. See, when Barak and Deborah were fighting against Sisera and Jabin, he rallied them at Mount Tabor. Why? Because it was the joining point of three tribes, of Issachar, Zebulun, and Naphtali. So they chose a very special place where all three tribes had a joint interest. And so the Temple Mount is where the three monotheistic faiths, Christianity and Judaism and Islam, have their connection, and they all want it. And they're all interested in it. And you see it is almost in the news every day, especially now we've got a very right-wing government in Israel, again under Benjamin Netanyahu, who had to make a coalition with very right-wing people who want to have great interest in the West Bank and in the Temple Mount. And I think we may see some fireworks. I mean, not literal fireworks, but political fireworks. It's be interesting to watch. The whole world is watching it. I believe in God and that the angels are at work to bring the end times to pass, and they work at the hearts of people, at the hearts of politicians, without them knowing it, to bring His purpose to pass.
So when you're standing there all those years working, and you know the Bible and you know the stories, Was there an emotion to that, to just thinking, wow, I can't believe I'm right here? And you have Abraham and Isaac and, just go through all of the people, all the way to Peter and, of course, Jesus. What was that like to be there for so long working?
It's something that developed slowly. As I said, I started needing a job. I was offered a job for a survey. I said, I don't know anything about surveying, but I know where the zero on the tape is. And I gave it a go. It was a time when you can do, if you're good at it, and so I started just measuring the walls. I like the architecture. Of course, always in the back of my mind, this is the temple in Jerusalem. Brought up as a Dutch Protestant, I was told that Jerusalem is in heaven. But now I can actually walk in the streets of it. It came with a totally different dimension to my faith. And the more I worked on the site, the more I was fascinated by it. Then reading the works of Josephus and archaeology and history and ancient architecture combined gave me a greater understanding of the scriptures. See, often we can read the scriptures and, we say hallelujah and we'll be saved. But there's much more to it. We need to not just read the Bible, but study the Bible. As David said, how love I thy law. It's my study all the day. And the deeper I got into the problems, trying to solve the problems of the Temple Mount, the greater the scripture became an open book to me. My wife Kathleen and I once went to the 7 churches in Revelation. And we visited each one of them. And in the ruins, we read the scriptures, the letter which Jesus wrote to the seven churches. And that became our motto, reading in the ruins. Wow. So be there on the spot, open your Bible. I never would say I dig with the Bible in one hand and the spade in the other. That's not true. I concentrated on my work. I did a good job from an architectural point of view. I surveyed every detail very meticulously. But you go back home and then you read the scriptures and slowly you build up such a complete picture made up of first archaeology, I got to be honest, and architecture, and then history, and then the scriptures. And it's like a crescendo leading up to the apex of a full understanding of the importance of this site. Without the archaeology, I would never have come to appreciate the Temple Mount as much as I do now, I believe.
Let me ask you this. You alluded to the fact that you've been all over the Temple Mount and even underneath the Temple Mount. So, did you get any glimpses at any shiny boxes with 2 angels on it?
I wasn't allowed to take my metal detector with me. The thing is, when you work on a site like that, and many people are interested, that the myths around the temple kind of multiply themselves. Mm-hmm. We had in 1911 the Parker mission. They believed that the gold of the Solomon's throne and his sword and the Ark of the Covenant are still buried in the Temple Mount, and they were digging illegally inside the Dome of the Rock, and they were found nothing. Mm-hmm. I believe the Romans took all the gold away. And talking about the Ark of the Covenant, that was whisked away by the priests, I believe, before the Babylonians could destroy it. See, archaeology was looked upon as a kind of a treasure hunt, mm-hmm. but I never followed that path. For me, it's straightforward scientific archaeology, and my expertise is architecture. So I studied ancient architecture of all sorts of periods, and that slowly brings up an understanding of what the site is all about. It's not in gold, it's not in silver, it's in the spiritual significance of the site. And all it does, some people like me to talk on the archaeology proves the Bible. No, it doesn't. I cannot prove the resurrection from archaeology, but it illuminates the Bible. Mm-hmm. Tremendously. It casts light on events and on places that give you a fuller understanding of Scripture. It enriches your reading. It was something that I developed over the years. I didn't start from, I'm working here on the side that God has chosen for the Jewish people. No, I started plainly with a job. Mm-hmm. But it's almost 50 years ago
Hmm.
that I started to work on the Temple Mount excavations, and I'm still busy with it most days. And I love the site. I love Israel. I love Jerusalem. And through my reconstruction drawings, I've been able to help people understand what the site looked like, but also the significance of the beautiful ancient site of the Temple Mount.
When Abraham was asked of God to go bring Isaac from Beersheba up to the mountains of Moriah, and that God would select a mountain, the right one to go to, an important place to God. And Isaac, when they were getting there, said, "Where's the sacrifice?" And Abraham said, "God himself will provide a lamb."
Yes.
And so what does that mean to you, that picture that was put forth by God of Abraham and Isaac, but then 1,000 years later, or a couple thousand years later, there actually was a sacrifice of a son by a father there as well?
Yes, I think it's an extremely important event. Also because the location, because Abram said, it says in the English, in the mount Yahweh will provide. But it doesn't say it in Hebrew. It says Bahar Yahweh Yira'eh. In the mount, the Lord will be seen. That's how I translate it. And that is where Jesus was seen. Now he showed the land of Moriah, the whole of the eastern hill of Jerusalem, from the Siloam pool, going up, City of David, the Ophel, the Temple Mount, the Antonia, and beyond, is the land of Mount Moriah. God has showed him one of the 4 peaks on which that happened. Could you sacrifice your son? You couldn't. I couldn't. I got 4 sons. I couldn't sacrifice any of them. Where did Abram get the faith from to do that? See, when Isaac could not have been born without God's intervention, because they're both too old to have children. A 90-year-old woman cannot conceive. It would be the end of her. It will destroy her physically. Mm-hmm. And then the angel said, at this time, I will return unto you, according to the word which he spoke. But the Hebrew says, I will restore unto you the time of life. And I believe they were rejuvenated. Like it says in Hebrews 11, Sarah received strength to give birth. Now there were 2 sacrifices on Mount Moriah. We've got the binding of Isaac, but Isaac wasn't sacrificed. And he became, again, according to Hebrews 11, a type. Abram believed that God would raise him from the dead. And he represents the risen Christ. But there was another sacrifice. Have you ever wondered why Jesus had to wear a crown of thorns? Was it just a whim of the Roman soldiers? No, I don't think anything happened to Jesus by accident. The second sacrifice was the ram. And the ram had his horn, where he had his head with his horn caught in a thorn bush. He had thorns in his head, that ram. And that ram was sacrificed. That ram was killed. And he represents the Christ that was crucified on the cross. But the binding of Isaac represents the risen Christ. So we got 2 sacrifices. One represented the crucifixion, and the other one represented the resurrection. And that all happened there on Mount Moriah. If that's not the most important connection we have with the Temple Mount, I don't know what else is. It is fascinating. It gives you a deeper insight in the events that took place thousands of years ago. And that makes a connection with the present and with the future. And that's the importance of work on the Temple Mount. All the things I've learned over the years by focusing on the Temple Mount, what happened to Mount Moriah through the ages, because they are all connected.
Amazing. Well, listen, you've given me a lot to think about today, things I haven't ever considered. So you're much more than just an architectural archaeologist, Dr. Ritmeyer. Thank you very much. Our prayers are with you and for you. I can't wait to see you again somewhere in Israel or somewhere else. And our prayers with you and with your family.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you. Hey, I hope you enjoyed our program on YouTube. We want to continue to provide you some great videos on God, the Bible, and how it all connects with our world.
It would really help us if you would consider subscribing to the InGrace YouTube channel. We would also like to have you comment. We will try to read and respond to them. And we also need you to hit the notification button and like the InGrace episode that you just saw. These ways will help more people hear about InGrace and more people hear the gospel of grace.